You are faithful till the end. Faithful, worship you. I worship you. You're too faithful to fail me. You're too faithful to disappoint me. You've proven yourself in my life, and I've come to realize you're too faithful to fail. I'm going nowhere without you. Oh, you are my anchor. I'm doing nothing without you. Oh, my life depends on you. Where you lead me, I will follow. Precious Holy Spirit, this life I live for you. Oh God, my life depends on you. My life is in your hands. My life is in your hands. My life is in your hands. You're the love of my life. My life is in your hands. My life is in your hands. My life is in your hands. You're the love of my life, Jesus. today and forevermore. What you say is what you do. You never fail, you never change. You are faithful till the end. Faithful God, I worship you. I worship you. You're too faithful to fail me.
Has been responding to treatment.
You're too faithful to disappoint me. You've proven yourself in my life, and I've come to realize you're too faithful to fail me. You're too faithful to fail me. Oh Jesus, you're too faithful to disappoint me. You've proven yourself in my life, and I've come to realize you're too faithful to fail me.
You say is what you do.
Lord, you never fail.
Never fail.
You never change, God.
You are faithful to
Faithful God.
faithful God.
I worship you. I worship you. You are.
You're too faithful to fail me.
Yes, you're too faithful to disappoint me.
You're
announcing the arrival of Mr. President, Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, the President of the Republic of Zambia and Commander-in-Chief. May we rise.
Yes, sir. It is, sir.
We may be seated. May we all be upstanding for the beginning of the procession.
Are you putting them on the table?
We may be seated, Mr. President. The Chief Mourner, Mrs. Cynthia Sarah Zukas, the children and the members of the bereaved family, Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, the President of the Republic of Zambia and Commander-in-Chief of the Defense Force, former Republican Vice Presidents present, First Deputy Speaker, Madam Attractor Sangano, Cabinet Ministers present, the Secretary of the Cabinet, UPND Alliance Council of Presidents, members present, former cabinet ministers present, political party leaders present, senior government officials, former national leaders present, Rabbi Moshe, Silverhaft, and all religious leaders present, members of the diplomatic corps accredited to the Republic of Zambia, members of the press, may I simply say, fellow mourners. I welcome you this morning to this official funeral procession and final resting place for the late Honorable Simon B. Zukas, former cabinet minister of the Republic of Zambia, who died on 27 September 2021 here in Lusaka, and will be put to rest here at Leopards Hill Memorial Park. The program will be as follows. Immediately after these remarks, I shall invite the Rabbi, who will lead us into the Jewish order of procession. I am Colonel Reverend Shadrach Mwale, Director, Religious and Moral Services, Zambia Army, and your Director of Program. To commence the burial program, allow me to invite Rabbi Moshe Silverhaft to lead us through the procession. The Rabbi.
His Excellency the President, Mrs. Zukas, the Chief Mourner, with her sons, David and Alan, and their families, members of the government of the Republic of Zambia, all dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, and how we always say, all protocol observed so that there's nobody left out with the introductions. I'd like to introduce to you today what a Jewish funeral is, what it's about, so that you understand as we go along the meaning and the symbolism of so many of the aspects. First of all, the Jewish practice of burying the dead in the ground has its basis on the words when God spoke to Adam in Genesis, and he said, "Dust you are, and dust is where you shall return." Therefore, to bring the dead to burial is a kindness for the deceased, affording the deceased recompense and also an expression of our regard for the preciousness of the human being, formed, as we know, in the image of God. You will notice when the flag comes off that the coffin is a plain wooden box. This is not to save money, but our tradition teaches us that we all come into the world the same, naked and with nothing. And when we die, we too leave with nothing, and we die all the same. And not everybody can afford fancy coffins with fancy shiny wood and gold handles, etc. So in order not to create differentiation and embarrassment for people that can't, everybody, every Jew, is buried in a plain pine coffin, which you will see when the flag comes off. Also, in its manufacture, there are no metal nails in the coffin, because we know that metal is the material of weapons and war, and one should not go to their eternal peace aided by elements of war. In addition, the interior of the coffin is very plain with a white sheet and unadorned. It is lined, as I said, with a plain white sheet. The departed is dressed in plain white garments with no pockets, symbolizing that we take nothing with us from this world except our good name, our good deeds, and our good reputation which we have created and worked on while on this earth. And we know that our dear friend Simon accumulated so much of that. It's also a Jewish custom not to have flowers at a grave and at a burial, at a cemetery, because flowers, first of all, are associated with a joyous celebration, which is it's being selfish about ourselves. And also the deceased cannot enjoy the flowers. So it's disrespectful to have flowers on a grave when the deceased can't enjoy the flowers with us. The memorial prayer. O Lord, who art full of compassion, who dwellest on high, God of forgiveness, who art merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in loving kindness, grant pardon of transgression, nearness of salvation, and perfect rest beneath the shadow of thy divine presence, in the exalted places among the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament, to Simon, Zukas, Shimon Ber Bereb, Chaim, Ze'ev, who has gone to his eternal home. We beseech you, O Lord of compassion, remember unto him for good all the meritorious and pious deeds which he did while on earth. Open unto him the gates of your righteousness and light, the gates of pity and grace. O shelter him forevermore under the cover of thy wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. You, the Lord, are his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and let us all say, Amen. Can I ask you please to rise as we recite Psalm 23 together? A song of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He causes me to lie down in greener pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even as I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you, dear God, are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You set a table before me in the presence of my adversaries. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of you, dear Lord, for the length of days. Amen. You may be seated.
As we proceed in our program, Mr. President, may I invite to the podium Dr. Seshua, a family friend, to give a life history in respect of the late Honorable Zukas, Bar Zukas, the Honorable Simon Bar Zukas, former cabinet minister. Mr. Dr. Seshua.
Thank you so much, Director of Ceremonies. Allow me to ride on the protocols of the Director of Ceremonies. My task is to summarize an epic life lived across nearly 100 years in a few words. That's not an easy one, but let me try. In April 1952, a 26-year-old man stood before the Northern Rhodesia Chief Justice, who had been asked by the Attorney General to consider whether this young man was a danger to peace and good order and whether he had been inciting Africans against Europeans. The judge was further asked to consider whether he found the grounds to recommend to the governor that the man should be deported. Following 2 days of court hearings, the young man was solemnly declared to be a danger to peace and good order. And after a fruitless appeal to the High Court and 8 months in jail in Livingstone, he was deported to England, a country he had previously neither visited nor lived in. That young man was one of the few white men to stand up against white supremacy in northern Rhodesia. He was a member of Harimanga Nkumbula's African National Congress, ANC, and one of the heroes of Zambia's struggle for independence. That young man was Simon Zukas, the distinguished troublemaker who died peacefully in his sleep at home in Lusaka on 27 September 2021. I must admit that for a while, Zukas had seemed so permanent as if in his case and that of a few others, such as Kenneth Kaunda and Andrew Sadanis, who died earlier this year, death would make an exception. The good thing, though, is that legends never die. They simply change form and location. But who is Zukas? And how did he end up in prison? Simon Zukas was born on 31 July 1925 in Lithuania, about 13 years before he came to Zambia on 26 July 1938 to join his father, a Jewish settler who had earlier migrated to the industrial copper belt and established himself as a successful trader. After completing his secondary education in Luanshya and colonial Zimbabwe and serving briefly in the armed forces during the Second World War, Zukas went to South Africa to read for a degree in civil engineering at the University of Cape Town in 1947. His time in South Africa, coinciding with the inauguration of apartheid, thrust him into radical student politics, where he distinguished himself as a shrewd operator and rehearsed his later confrontations with the African colonial apparatus. Upon graduation in December 1950, the young engineer returned to Zambia, where he learned of the colonial government's plans to federate the country with Zimbabwe, then Southern Rhodesia, and Malawi, Nyasaland. Arguing that this would serve the interest of the white settler minority, further disadvantaging the black majority and delaying the attainment of independence, Zukas put aside his professional and personal considerations to join the ANC, the main nationalist movement at the time. Though constituting a risk to his own life, his decision to confront those who perpetuated injustice and become an active participant in the struggle for independence was a statement of his commitment to equality and was in sharp contrast to most whites at the time whose support for African causes was limited to hushed statements from the safety and comfort of home. When white settlers and the colonial regime intensified their campaign for the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland, Zukas, alongside other young militant nationalists like Justin Chimba, Ruben Kamanga, Jonathan Chivunga, Nefas Tembo, and Abner Kazunga, formed in April 1951 the Anti-Federation Action Committee, of which he became secretary, and began rallying thousands of Zambians, especially those on the influential Copper Belt, to resist the proposed plans. Noting his growing influence in the nationalist movement, the colonial government ordered him to abandon his opposition to the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland, and when he defied the directive, sent him to prison in April 1952. He remained in detention until December that year, when he was deported. But Zukas never turned his back on Zambia. He remained a hugely significant political figure in the nationalist movement, rendering support from London in the form of strategic advice, mobilizing considerable resources, and serving as the crucial link between the African nationalists in Zambia and their backers abroad. Upon independence in October 1964, the new government, led by President Kenneth Kaunda and the United National Independence Party, UNIP, invited Zukas to return to Zambia. Despite running a successful engineering consulting firm in England, he came back to Lusaka and, in a unique manifestation of patriotism, took Zambian citizenship in October 1965. While he was close to Zambia's political leadership in the First and Second Republics, Zukas devoted much of his time during this period to establishing and leading his engineering consulting firms. He offered the young country his professional expertise and was responsible for the structural designs and supervision of major public works such as Parliament, State Lodge, University of Zambia School of Mines, and the flyover bridge on the Great East Road. The UNIP leadership also regularly consulted him on a variety of subjects, and his advice was greatly valued. Further national involvement was expressed through his board membership to state institutions such as the Industrial Development Corporation, Zambia National Building Society, the National Council for Scientific Research, and the UNZA Council, on which he served from 1966 to 1990. After his efforts to persuade President Kaunda and UNIP to abandon the one-party state failed, Zukas, like many Zambians, broke ranks with his friends and joined the drive toward multi-party politics. He attended the Garden House Conference that resulted in the creation of the Movement for Multi-Party Democracy, MMD, in July 1990, was elected as the party's first vice national chairperson at its inaugural convention in February 1991, and played a leading role in the political revolution that followed. In the founding general elections following the reintroduction of multi-party politics, Zukas easily won a parliamentary seat in Sikongo constituency in Western Province. That he, a white Zambian, achieved that feat in one of the country's most conservative regions, where he had no roots whatsoever, speaks to Zukas' nationalist credentials as well as his political skill and ability to convince people of the need for change. Between 1991 and 1996, under President Frederick Chiluba's government, Zukas held several ministerial positions, and history shows that he stood by his principles, was never afraid to speak his mind, and championed the interests of the poor and the disadvantaged. He frequently cautioned his colleagues not to lose sight of the reasons why the MMD was formed and had been given an overwhelming mandate by the electorate. Zukas despised political sycophancy and hero-worshipping leaders. Thus, he was almost always guided by pragmatism, his conscience, and respect for human dignity. When the Chiluba government passed 1996 constitution, which among other things barred former President Kaunda and lost his senior chief Nyamboyeta from contesting the 96 general elections, Zukas, as did Deepak Patel, quit his cabinet position in protest. His resignation signified that there could be civility in politics and that the principle of collective responsibility could not be sustained when the government was doing wrong. He remains one of the few politicians to voluntarily resign their lucrative ministerial positions in the Third Republic, alongside Akashamba Tombikisalewanika, Bodwin Nkumbula, Ludwig Sondashi, Roger Chongwe, and Vice President Levi Mwanawasa. When President Chiluba hatched plans toward the end of his second term to amend the Constitution of Zambia and seek an unconstitutional third term of office, Zukas joined hands with him. Zukas' personal life spoke of temperance, mental and physical discipline, and the presence of an equal partner, Cynthia Robinson, whom he married on 30 January 1954, and with whom they bore 2 sons. Cynthia Robinson helped him reach such a grand age in an era when lifespans and marriages are increasingly short. As a genuine and dedicated cadre of progressive change, a defender of principle and the public good, and a porter of a moral power earned from selfless service, as the foot soldier for freedom, development, democracy, equality, and justice, Zukas envied true citizenship. Ever on the right side of history, he showed us that to live is a state of continual consciousness. While highly approachable and humble, he held strong political beliefs rooted in deep principles and identification with the underdog, for which he was prepared to sacrifice privilege. The young generation of political activists should look to his long and distinguished political career for example and inspiration. In a world in which many people are driven to show off not just their wealth and power, but also their heroism, the numerous sacrifices they had to make, and the grand battles they had to fight, Zukas refused to beat his own drum, repeatedly praising the work of others rather than himself, and he remained extraordinarily modest about his considerable achievements. Zambia has great need of such patriots and active citizens as Zukas, who understand that the essence of life is service. It was as if he was spurred by the words of the Chilean poet and revolutionary Pablo Neruda, who in the poem, "So is my life," wrote, and I quote, "My duty moves along with my song. I am not. That is my destiny. I exist not if I do not attend to the pain of those who suffer. They are my pains. For I cannot be without existing for all. for all who are silent and oppressed. I come from the people, and I sing for them. My poetry is song and punishment. I am told you belong to darkness, perhaps, but I walk toward the light. I'm the man of bread and fish, and you will not find me among books. But with women and men, they have taught me the infinite, unquote. May we all pick up the baton to attend to the pain of those who suffer, to exist for the silent and oppressed, to walk toward the light, and learn from Zukas' life, the infinite. Thank you so much for kind attention.
That was a life history of the late Honorable Simon Bay Zukas. As we proceed in our program, may I invite once again Rabbi Moshe to give us a homily.
Today we are gathered here to pay tribute to and convey to his final rest a devoted patriot, freedom fighter, and heroic pioneer of the nation of Zambia. Like so many people of the Jewish faith who from the late 1800s onwards made their homes in southern Africa, Simon Zukas originally came from Eastern Europe. He was born, as we heard, Shimon Ber Zukas in a small Lithuanian town in 1925, and had just entered his teens when he arrived in the then northern Rhodesia just before the outbreak of World War II. For the rest of his long and productive life, for much of which his beloved wife and helpmeet Cynthia at his side, he would devote himself to furthering the well-being of his adopted country. My friends, in describing Cynthia, you will have noticed that I used the word helpmeet rather than the better-known helpmate. This is because whereas a helpmate simply provides assistance to another person, a helpmeet is a true partner in that person's life's work. And this is indeed the role that you, Cynthia, an outstanding citizen of this country in your own right, have always played. And for that we are thankful and very proud. Regardless of Simon's foreign birth and the fact that he was not only white, but a member of a small religious minority, Simon Zukas was a Zambian to the core, and so was he regarded by his fellow citizens, regardless of race or creed. As spiritual leader of the African Jewish Congress, I was privileged to have many opportunities of meeting and working with him, and can attest to how strongly the teachings of his Jewish heritage underpinned his approach to everything that he did. Simon was profoundly influenced not just by the moral ethical teachings of Judaism, but by the historical experiences of the Jewish people with whom he never ceased to identify. In a large part, his abhorrence for injustice, particularly when based on race, was informed by the tragic fate of the Jewish communities of Eastern Europe, including his own hometown during the Holocaust. Today, we must consign the earthly remains of this great Zambian patriot to their final resting place. Our president of the African Jewish Congress, Mrs. Ann Harris, wrote a message to the family. Our Congress has for the last 28 years represented the interests of all Jewish communities in the countries of sub-Saharan Africa, of which Zambia is a proud leader. Simon Zukas was a vice president and active member of our organization. His pride in his nation of Zambia and the excellence and fortitude with which he served his country in many different public spheres created a glow of honor which reflected on our Congress. He had the strength and loyalty to be at one at the same time, the proudest of Zambians, and an outspoken example of his Jewish identity. To us, The loss of our father figure is immeasurable, and we are quite sure that all of Zambia feels the same. It is our belief that those who serve their country and community as faithfully as Simon Zukas did will sit at the right hand of the Almighty, who watches over us, ensuring that in His memory we will be granted the ability to earn peace and success for all. End of quote. As the person charged with officiating on this inevitably sad occasion, I am aware that I am bidding farewell not only to a member of my own far-flung African Congress, but also to a colleague and a friend. May the memory of Shimon Ber Zukas be a blessing, and may the examples that he set be a source of inspiration for all generations to come. Amen.
Mr. President, the beloved family and fellow mourners, we continue in our program. At this moment, allow me to invite the following family members to come and give a tribute of the late Honorable Minister. May I, the first one, invite Mr. David Zukas, the son to the late, to come through and give a tribute to his father.
Mr. President, all the VIPs present, and friends. My father, Simon Zukas, died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 96, a good old age, after a very full, productive, and creative life. Nevertheless, it is still a very sad time for our family. My family have lost his love. We only have it in memory. We've lost his care and we've lost his wise advice. My mother, who's present, her sister, who's not here, my brother and his wife, all my cousins, and all of our children, some of whom are present, will all have their stories about Simon and the influence, the very positive influence that he's had on them and their lives. But I just want to give a few little vignettes of my own. So Simon was a very clever man, as many of you know. But it wasn't just in an intellectual sense. So he was clever as a father and caring as a father. So I remember sometimes, especially once we arrived in Zambia, we would be walking, hiking through the bush, and my mother and my brother and I would be getting very tired and asking, are we nearly there? When are we going to finish this? And he'd always say, it's just around the corner. And then we'd get round the corner and he'd say, no, it's just around the next corner. And after a while, of course, we all knew it wasn't just around the corner, but at the same time, we were uplifted by his care for us, and he always got us safely to the end. And I have a similar story from later in my life, because Simon knew that as a child, I wasn't a very good flyer. And later, I must have been in my 30s, I was in Zambia, and he and I traveled to Botswana together. He had a branch of his engineering business in Botswana at that time. And since I was here, he said, come with me, I've got to go there on business, but we can spend some time together. When we got to the airport to fly back to Zambia, we could see a really big tropical storm brewing. The sky was virtually black, and in the blackness we could see the lightning going off in the clouds. So on the tarmac there was one jet aircraft and 2 or 3 smaller propeller aircraft. And knowing that I was, in the past at least, scared of flying, and knowing it was going to be a turbulent flight, he said to me, "Oh, that jet down there, I'm sure that's our plane to Zambia." And even as he said it, I knew it wasn't true. But I loved him for telling me that little fib to keep me going until we were on the flight home. Another recollection from that period, we were driving. My mother was there, my father, and I was driving. We were driving supposedly all the way to Mongo, which is very far. And we were taking it in turns to drive. And while I was driving, it was at the end of the UNIP era, and the roads were very potholed. But we came across a patch of road which seemed perfectly good. I picked up speed a bit, and then suddenly there was an enormous pothole. It was taking up half the road. I tried to avoid it, I swerved, I lost control of the vehicle, and we ended up upside down, facing the wrong way down the road. Fortunately, we were all okay. And as I rushed out the car through the broken glass, my father brushed out the car through the broken glass, and I could see the car was completely wrecked. And he immediately said to me, "It doesn't matter. We're all alive. That's all that matters." And he never once blamed me for writing off his precious Range Rover, which cost him so much money. So it's a kind of memory of the uprightness of the man, that he was always fair, he was always kind within the family in that way. So all of my family admired Simon. We all looked up to him. I know that my own 2 sons, who are now teenagers, see him as a model for their own life. They look to the qualities that he showed them as a guiding star for their own lives. And I'm quite sure that all the rest of my family members and the wider family circle will feel the same as they do, that Simon was a light in their lives, and he will be very sorely missed. But the circle is wider than my family. Zambia will miss him. Simon loved Zambia. He really loved Zambia. I only heard just on this visit from my mother that when he proposed to her, all the way back in the 1950s, he set a condition to their marriage. He said, "Yes, I want to marry you, but if you marry me, you have to be prepared to come back to Zambia with me as soon as Zambia is independent. Otherwise, we can't marry." So I think that's extraordinary. Usually when people are in love, they'll do anything. But Simon was always a man of clear principle. And even his beloved wife-to-be, he told her, "If you marry me, effectively you're marrying Zambia." So because of that, because of his love of Zambia, Zambians love him too. It's so clear when people have come to visit at the house and give their condolences, how much he will be missed here in Zambia. And although Seshua has very well highlighted his political achievements, I want to highlight the more personal element in that. So Simon befriended and mentored people, Zambians, over many generations, and very many different spheres of life. So he mentored some of the early Zambian nationalists. he befriended and mentored the new generation of Zambian engineers who worked with him in his firm. He worked with and gave advice to and discussed things with the Zimbabwean and South African freedom fighters when they were our guests in this country. I can remember myself as a teenager many times sitting in on his conversations with those freedom fighters, discussing the way forward. I wasn't party to it, but I'm sure that he acted as a father figure to the UNZA board and the Indico board and the other boards that he was member of. He was certainly one of the progenitors and mentors of those in the movement for multi-party democracy. I'm not talking about MMD as a party. I'm talking about the whole movement that changed the nature of democracy in Zambia. And the way that he took a personal interest in those young people who joined that movement, in educating them in Zambian history, Zambian politics, and guiding them in the way forward. And when MMD was no longer a suitable place to do that, he did that in FDD and then later in OSIDA. So many of you who benefited from Simon's advice, from his encouragement, from his belief in you, are here with us today, celebrating his life and mourning his passing. And you will know that he always worked with others. It's already been said that he was quite humble about his own status, his own achievements. But I think part of that was a principle that no single person has the right to dictate anything. He always worked with others, and he worked with them through encouragement, through friendship, through personal guidance. And that's why, as Seshua said in an article, he remained relevant in Zambia all the way through his life. Even as Zambia changed, as Zambia progressed, he was always there with new thoughts, new ideas for new generations to listen to. As you know, he stood for freedom. He stood for equality. He stood for human rights. He stood for morality, and above all, I think, he stood for truth. Actually, the circle of his influence is even wider than Zambia. For those who have learnt about him, he's an inspiration. I was astonished. Once I got over the initial shock of his death, I put something on Facebook saying that my father had died for my friends. Most of them never met him, the vast majority. Many of them didn't know anything about his life or even about Zambia. And I couldn't believe the dozens of responses I got when people, I also put a link to Seshua's article about Simon that was available here. And so many people responded saying, he was such a great man. I found that so inspiring reading about him. So, yes, I think we should always remember him. We should admire him. We should be inspired by him. But in order to benefit from that, we have to take it quite personally. We have to hold him close to our hearts, not as a distant ideal. So one thing that Seshua did say in his longer article, which made the family laugh, he said Simon was teetotal. Simon was not. As his son, I have to tell the truth. He enjoyed a glass of wine with his meal, and sometimes I remember when he came home from his engineering work, he enjoyed a glass of brandy as he relaxed in the evening. I never saw him drunk, it did him no harm. But he wasn't actually teetotal. So I hope that we're not going to try and canonize my father. I hope we're not going to try and turn him into more than he was, because when we turn someone into more than they were, we actually turn them into less than they were. My father was a great human being. He stood for humanity. And as human beings, I would like us to remember him in that way, as a friend, as someone we can aspire to be like, if we remember that the qualities that he had are qualities that we can aspire to. He is not so distant from us that we cannot follow him. So whether it's my family or people in Zambia, I hope that we will become more like my father was. All it needs is to be principled, to be incorruptible, to learn to think for ourselves and to speak out. That was the basis of his life. And I say all it needs. But that's a very great deal. So to encourage us in following him in his path, I would like to finish with a short memory of something he told me. So he said that when he joined the army, he never fought in the Second World War, but they were being trained to fight the Japanese. The war ended before they were sent to the Far East. But he imagined, he looked ahead, what would it be like? How would he be in battle? And he knew it scared him. He was a young man and he had his life before him. He didn't want to die at that stage. So he talked with someone more experienced than him who had been in campaigns in his regiment. And he told me that this officer said to him, being a coward, Simon was more afraid of being a coward than he was afraid of dying. This officer said to him, being a coward is not about being afraid. Everybody is afraid. Being a coward is about not facing your fear and overcoming it. So that was something he learned, something he passed on to me, and I pass that on to you as words from Simon, that we all feel fear, we all wonder how we will go forward and take the next step to be true to our own conscience. But we shouldn't be afraid of that fear. All we need to do is face it and go forward anyway. So these are my last words from Simon to you on this sad occasion. So thank you, and may he rest in peace.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zukas. May I invite also Ben Zukas, the grandson, to come and give a tribute for his grandfather.
Thank you, Director of Ceremonies, Mr. President, Chief Mourner, my grandmother, Cynthia Zukas, and my family, Alan Zukas and Mrs. Shenda Zukas. All protocols observed. On behalf of the grandchildren, I've been asked to say a few words about our grandfather. We loved our grandfather very much, and he loved us. he also loved his great-grandchildren, which we're lucky enough to meet him, Reuben and Daniel, and also my daughter, Tasheni. Growing up, he came across as a bit of an imposing figure. I think all young children are a little bit in awe of their grandparents and a little bit scared, but I think that's fine. But he did have a lighter side. I remember raiding the cupboards at our home in Lusaka with my grandfather, giggling at the time. I think we were looking for chocolate. And he made me swear, "Do not tell your grandmother." So, I smiled and we laughed together. And as we grew up, as adults, we had the pleasure of finding that he had a wicked sense of humor. And that caused our family great joy over the years. But we didn't understand, as young children, fully who our grandfather was. It was only later in life, as we grew up, that we started to realize who he was to the Zambian nation. So for us, first and foremost, he will always remain our grandfather, or Simon, as he asked the older grandchildren to call him. He wasn't ready to be called Grandpa. So our memories of him are of a kind man who would welcome our achievements and entertain our interests and hobbies with a twinkle in his eye, keen amusement, and just encouragement to all of us. But as we've come to grow up and learn more, and seeing everyone here today, it's such an honor, and we thank you for that. It's important to us to see how he is viewed by others, in particular in those in his field and also outside of Zambia. We're so proud to remember him, not only as our grandfather, but as a hero for the struggle for independence, and indeed someone who has continued to speak out for Zambia and her people ever since. He was an honorable man, and we learnt a lot from him on how to compose ourselves in our lives. And that transferred into his children, especially my father, Alan. And that's how we compose ourselves now. Where there was darkness, he brought the light. Where there was injustice, he brought justice. Where there was inequality, he strove for equality. We loved our grandfather, and he loved us. He will be sorely missed. I thank you.
Those are memories from a great-grandfather, which all we need to emulate. As we continue our program, may I take this opportunity to invite Mr. Gilbert Temba, representative of our Civic Duty Association, OSIDA, to give few remarks on this great son of Zambia. Mr. Gilbert Temba.
Your Excellency, President Hakainde Hichilema, Mrs. Cynthia Zukas and family, may I also follow what the previous speakers did, that is to observe protocol and make the speech even shorter. I am deeply humbled to be requested by the Zukas family to speak on behalf of OSIDA, an organization, as you've heard, whose founding Mr. Zukas pioneered and spearheaded. At his death, Mr. Zukas was chairman of OSIDA, a trust formed in February 2020, that is last year, whose vision is to develop a Zambia that is truly democratic and respects fundamental human rights of its people, and enabling them to fully participate in its governance and a sustainable economic development agenda. Equally, its mission says it would like to promote, support, and enhance good governance practices through active and transparent participation of its people. Prior to this, Mr. Zukas, whose political life in Zambia is a 70-year love story, as you've heard, has always been a dedicated human rights activist of immense stature. Earlier in 2004, to demonstrate what I've just said, Mr. Zukas joined hands with many friends from different walks of life. You may recall people like Dean Mungomba, Honorable Alexander Chikwanda, Emily Sikazwe, Ruben Lifuka, Dr. Patrick Matibina, our recent Speaker of the National Assembly, Neo Simutani, to mention a few, and other business people and professionals alike, and formed an organization called Citizens Forum. By coincidence, Citizens Forum was very similar, or has very similar objectives like OSIDA, whose objectives were to promote good governance in Zambia. This organization, Mr. President, contributed immensely to constitutional reform and development at that time. Most importantly, the Citizens Forum was founded with an agenda of creating a political platform for citizens to air their views and feelings in order to improve political leadership and thereby fill the political vacuum through the direct participation of citizens in the affairs of the nation, so that the people of Zambia could exert more influence on the way their country was being governed by politicians. Mr. Zukas played an immensely significant role in this campaign. 16 years later, and that is in February 2020, Mr. Zukas was at it again. During the launch of our Civic Duty Association, Mr. Simon Zukas explained the reasons for this kind of organization, and I quote, "It is out of concern for the current social, political, and economic state of our country that some of us senior citizens, not including me, I'm talking about very senior citizens, found it necessary to establish OSIDA as a vehicle to promote good governance and sound economic management in the country," unquote. May I take this opportunity, Mr. President, to emphasize this point? Some of these senior citizens included the people like Ambassador Lily Monze, the Archbishop Emeritus of the Catholic Diocese Lusaka, Archbishop Mpundu, Dr. Sketchley Sachika, Ambassador Mbula, Botis Kapulo, Yusuf Patel. By coincidence, these people, I think the youngest was 75 years of age. And as you can imagine, the oldest was Simon Zukas, who was 94 at the time. Some of us who were below 75 were relegated to much junior roles of being managers, including my brother Bob Chinga here and so many others, because we did not qualify to be in this imminent group of elderly citizens who felt hurt by what was happening in the country. Prior to the formation of OSIDA, Mr. Zukas was deeply concerned about the precarious state of the nation that had arisen from corruption and tolerance of it, from the diminishing political space, the lack of inclusiveness, the partisan use of public media by the ruling party, and the partisan political application of the Public Order Act by the police. And as the country headed to the recent elections, OSIDA, with strong inspiration from our chairman, became extremely concerned about the polarization of the country on tribal and regional lines. OSIDA thus sought to promote and restore the unity of our country under the motto of One Zambia, One Nation. This was why Mr. Zukas and this team promoted and encouraged uniting political parties into an alliance. I am proud today that we listened to the public and helped and foster the UPND alliance because they had similar vision and mission to our own beliefs, which was good governance and so on. For OSIDA, we hope the change of government that has taken place through the ballot will create a foundation for good governance, Mr. President, inclusive social development, and a sustainable economic program in the country. This, as I said, resonates very well with OSIDA's mission and vision. And I'm quite sure that Mr. Zukas has left Zambia a very happy man. And I saw, Cynthia, you were quoted yesterday in the press saying exactly what I've said, that Simon has left Zambia a very happy man, having achieved this change in helping to bring about what we have now to do, the new dawn. So, Your Excellency, President Hakainde, if you don't do what you promise you'll do, Zukas will wake up. May I end by paying tribute to Cynthia and her family for allowing us the opportunity to have abused Simon because of his immense leadership qualities, his love, dedication for this country, and the creation of OSIDA, which, as stated above, we believe contributed to the recent change to which many well-meaning Zambians immensely subscribed. Go well, Simon. We'll miss you, but we shall never forget your inspirational leadership. May the good Lord receive your soul and grant you eternal peace. Thank you.
That was another great tribute of the legendary Simon Bey Zukas. We proceed with speeches. May I now invite the Honorary Council of the State of Israel in Zambia, Mr. Sinyambale, to come and give his remarks. Mr. Mbale.
The President of the Republic of Zambia, Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, Mrs. Simon Zukas, all senior government present here, officials, all protocols observed. Dear family and friends, we in Israel, along with all Zambians, mourn the passing of Simon Bey Zukas, a great Zambian and a great Jew. Nevertheless, we would like to also celebrate his life, for it was a life for freedom and struggle and search for goodness. Simon pursued integrity. The Bible in Leviticus 25, verse 10 says, "Proclaim freedom through the land for all its inhabitants." Simon did not just proclaim freedom, but he did everything he could at great personal cost, including his expulsion to England, to achieve freedom for all Zambians from colonial rule. Simon gave his all to this country. From independence onwards, a service which has always been for common good and never self-serving for personal gain. As one of the leaders for the small Jewish community in Zambia, Simon has always been a fountain of wisdom, a source of good advice to generations of ambassadors to Zambia, including myself. He was very keen to learn about the infrastructure and agriculture projects carried out by Israeli companies in Zambia, as well as the developmental activities of the government of Israel in partnership with Zambia, and encourage and assist activities as they got successful. Simon was particularly pleased to hear about our students' projects from Zambian universities who took part in a work and study program in Israel in the last few years. I'm sure that he would have been delighted to learn that this number has now increased to 100 students going to Israel annually, and especially this coming academic year. He was equally pleased to also to learn about the little hearts that went and came back mended from our Save a Child's Heart program in Israel, and a team of Zambian professionals that are currently attending training in Israel and will soon be able to conduct pediatric health care here at home. In Simon's honor, my office and the Jewish Congress have embarked on a project to distribute the Gateway Jewish Museum Project book to schools in Livingstone and ensure the museum that Simon championed in Livingstone remained a legacy to the Jewish contribution in Zambia. On my behalf, on behalf of Ambassador Gershon Keda, the past ambassador, and the designated ambassador offer, I would like to end with these words, first in in Hebrew, and in English. Hamokam yecham etam batov sha alevi tision Jerusalem. May the Lord comfort you, all the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. I thank you.
Fellow mourners, it is now my very, very rare honor and privilege to invite Mr. President, Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, the President of the Republic of Zambia and Commander-in-Chief of the Defense Force, to address the mourners. Mr. President.
President Scott served this country as president for a couple of months. First Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, cabinet ministers, serving cabinet ministers, former ministers, Deputy Secretary to the Cabinet, my colleagues in the UPND and the Alliance, Broad Alliance, as Mr. Temba said, of course, our political colleagues, political leaders, senior government officials, our diplomats accredited to this country. Rabbi Moshe and all the religious leaders that are here. Of course, fellow citizens, fellow mourners. Today, we, the people of Zambia, are yet again bidding farewell, and sadly so this time, bidding farewell to a gallant freedom fighter. We may call him a veteran politician. Veteran connotes past, but Simon was never in a mode of past. He was in a mode of past, present, and future. Simon wasn't just a politician, a freedom fighter. Simon was a businessman. And sometimes we forget that part of his life. He did a lot of good in the business circles, in the investment circles. we remember him from that angle as well. On behalf of the government and the people of Zambia, indeed, on my own behalf, I wish to extend my deepest condolences to you, Cynthia, the children, grandchildren, and the wider family on the loss of Simon Zukas. And today is especially sad because not long ago, just almost 3 weeks ago, Simon and his colleagues visited us in State House, and we had a wonderful conversation. A conversation that told anyone in that meeting that at 96, Simon had still a very strong and sound brain. It's easy to tell that in a meeting of 40 minutes, 1 hour. Very easy to tell that. And the conversation we had did not indicate in any way that Simon would be gone just under 3 weeks from that day. Most unfortunate. And while this is a solemn occasion, we should take a moment to reflect on the goodness of God, the Almighty, who allowed Simon a long life, who allowed Simon a fulfilling life, as we have heard from the speeches, Sishua's speech, obviously, the diplomat representing the state of Israel, the nation of Israel, my older brother, Gilbert Temba, the family, in the name of the son and the grandchildren. God allowed Simon to live a befitting life, a life that demonstrated what it means to serve humanity. We're grateful for that. Fellow mourners, let us use this occasion to celebrate Simon, to celebrate this engineer, this love of humanity, for his immense selfless contribution to the political and economic landscape of our country. Simon, to Simon, service to humanity was always something important. It came first before self. We just need to reflect where we are seated, and those listening or following this funeral procession, how do we measure up? How much do we think of others before ourselves whenever we're confronted with a situation? Many simply walk away and say, those people who are suffering are not my relatives by blood. To Simon, we were all his relatives. We were all his family members. And he was concerned about our warfare. We had a general election in 1988, where then the Super Ken won by a landslide. But many saw beyond that perceived landslide, that it wasn't really a landslide. It was a structural problem in a democratic situation, which was really non-existent at the time. And a year or so later, Simon and others decided it was time for change. And they worked tirelessly together with many citizens of high-profile nature. But more important, Simon worked with millions of Zambians who were what you may call common citizens, interacting with them, agreeing that it was time for change. And indeed, in 1991, change came, driven by those who believed in the importance of democracy, in the importance of fairness and equitable treatment to all citizens and those who live in a country like this one. Very respectable, isn't it? Question yourself again as an individual. What do you do when segregation, oppression is visible in society? What would you as an individual do? How would you react to that situation? Would you do what Simon did? You can answer that question yourselves. But Simon did it for us, for all of us. Fellow mourners, Simon was dedicated to service. He did this with distinction. I'm not too sure how he managed to weave around his successful business, a professional services business he ran, which required a lot of time and intellectualism. How he did that, weaved around that, the need to spend quality time and to serve community. And as we hear, CEDA was formed, why was CEDA supported the process of change, activities around change, which was quite threatening to many who needed or were happy to have a comfort zone of their home, because we were faced with difficulties where you couldn't even mobilize as a political party the way you wanted. And he reminded me that we were able to achieve a change of government, yet another change of government, in quite a hostile environment, and that we must maintain this atmosphere which we have just been able to be granted through human intervention, but more important, through the will of God. And my elder brother, Gilbert Temba, I want to assure you that under our leadership, working with all of you citizens and friends of Zambia, we shall endeavor to grow democracy, rule of law, constitutionalism, human rights, liberties, and freedoms, fairness in society, equity, as we strive to rebuild the economy, which is the agenda for which the citizens of Zambia put us in this public office. We want to work together, correcting each other along the way, so we can allow Simon to rest and he doesn't have to wake up. Let us honor this great man by committing unconditionally, dedicating ourselves to the welfare to the service of others. But we cannot achieve that without economic success, without creating opportunities for our people. Chief Mourner and the family, and all of us here, we all honor Simon. We should remember him, and we thank him for all that he did for humanity. God bless you all.
Thank you, Mr. President. We may be seated. May I now invite the Rabbi, Moshe Silver Haft, to proceed with the burial rites. The Rabbi.
Those of you that are familiar with the text in the Bible, it tells us that when Jacob heard that his son Joseph was sold, what was the public sign of mourning that he did? He wrenched his garment, he tore his garment. And that has become the custom of Jewish people, to tear a garment as a public sign of mourning. So I'd now like to call on Mrs. Zukas and David and Alan to come with her and stand over here next to the coffin as we wrench the garment of Mrs. Zukas. To the Almighty, that just as we accept the good and we bless Him for the good, so we declare Him the ultimate and true judge, which is Dayam Hamet, as you said. For death, which we perceive, we see as negativity, but yet we say to God Almighty, wherever you send us, we bless you.
May I invite the pallbearers and carrying party?
Quick, march. Wait, 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 wait.
Okay, and when are they doing the gun salute? Please, can you all rise as Simon takes his final resting journey? Come closer. Don't get a fright. It's coming again, don't get a fright. There's one more, don't get a fright, it's coming again. One more coming on.
Okay.
Okay.
We may be seated.
I'd like to call His Excellency the President to come and place 3 shovels of sand on the coffin of Mr. Zukas, symbolically representing and paying tribute on behalf of the Zambian nation. Mr. Excellency, your President. Yeah, in these three of them. That's one. Yeah, it's fine in the middle, it's fine. Thank you, Your Excellency. I now call on Mrs. Cynthia Zukas to also place 3 spades of soil into the grave. Once she's done, we'll ask David and then Ellen. Can we get also Shenda, Ben, Jesse, and Rachel to please come forward? Yeah, you guys also want to do, yeah, please.
The engineers be on standby.
Honorary Consul for the State of Israel, Mr. Sinyan Bali, please come forward and place 3 spades of sand on behalf of the government of Israel. Yes, please. Mr. Ohad Schwartz, on behalf of the local Jewish community. If you're done, you can go. If you want to stay, you can go back. Stay. Okay, that's fine. Sure.
cover, that's when I'll invite. After we do the flag, then I'll invite.
May I invite the Zambia Army military engineers to come and cover the grave? Mr. President and fellow monarchs, this is a symbolic burial. Immediately after we all depart, the family and the military engineers will proceed with the final covering of the grave. Thank you very much, the engineers. May I now, at this point in time, invite Brigadier General Gino Muke, Director General, Civil Military Affairs, Zambia Army, to present the national flag to the President, who in turn present to Mrs. Cynthia Zukas. The Director General, sir. May we all be upstanding.
Yeah, sure, we can, sure.
So that
Yes, 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 sure, sure.
That is His Excellency handing over the flag to the widow, Mrs. Cynthia Sarah Zukas. We may be seated. As we come to near end of our ceremony, may I invite Mr. David Zukas to give a vote of thanks, the final vote of thanks to the mourners. Mr. Zukas.
Mr. President, first of all, I would like to thank you for granting my father a state funeral. We all know he deserved it. We all know that his life was worth it. But I want to thank you personally for being the kind of person who was willing to recognize that, who could recognize that good in Simon. So thank you very much. I'd also like to thank all the people who have contributed to the success of today's event. So many people from the Cabinet Office, the military, the police, my brother Alan and my sister-in-law Shenda, who've done so much to liaise with the authorities, the Rabbi for coming up from all the way from South Africa to conduct the funeral, and all of you here for coming to say goodbye to Simon Zukas. Thank you.
Mr. President and fellow mourners, may we all be upstanding for a closing prayer and the national anthem. The Rabbi for the prayer.
While I recite the closing prayer, I'm going to ask members of the Jewish community, male members of the Jewish community, to please come forward closer to the grave to recite the Kaddish when I complete the prayer. As we know, Lord, that your judgment is right, you are righteous when you speak and pure when you judge, and none shall question your judgment. Righteous are you, O Lord, and your judgments are upright. You are the true judge, who judges with righteousness and truth. Blessed is the true judge, for all of his judgments are righteous and true. The soul of every living creature is in your hand. Righteousness fills your right hand and your left hand. Have mercy on the remnants of the flock under your hand, and say to the angel of death, hold back your hand. You are great in counsel and mighty in carrying it out, for your eyes are open to all the ways of mankind, to give everyone in accordance with his ways and in accordance with the fruits of his deeds. To declare that the Lord is just, he is my strength, and there is no injustice in the Lord. The Lord gave and the Lord took. May the name of the Lord be blessed. I now ask the members of the Jewish community to say a prayer called Kaddish. It is a prayer in Aramaic, which is said at the passing of a dear person, and it has no mention of death or of the deceased. It's purely sanctifying the name of God. Yitkadal
ויתקדש שמי רבה.
Amen.
בעלמא דיברה כרותה וימליך מלכותה ויצמח פורקנה ויקרב משיחה. בחי יכון וביום יכון ומחיה לכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן.
אמן. יהי שמי רבה.
יש שמי רבה מבורך לעולם, לעלמי עלמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל.
שמי דקודשה ברכו.
אמן.
לעילה מכל ברכתה, שירתה, צלחתה, ונחמתה, דאמרן, בעלמא ואמרו אמן.
אמן.
יש שלמה רבה מן שמיה, חיים וסבל וישועה ונחמה ושזבה ורפואה וגאולה וסליחה וכפרה ורווח והצלה לנו לכל עמו ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו וברחמיו יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל, ואמרו אמן.
The band We all keep still, except the service chiefs, to take their position as the Director General takes permission. We all remain where we are, except the service chiefs. We all keep our positions until Mr. President leaves this area of the burial site. Immediately the president leaves, I'll allow the former vice presidents to take leave also. We may be seated as the other dignitaries leave, and then we all leave once the dignitaries leave. So still remain seated. The procession is still on. At an appropriate time, there will be a national anthem. We will all be required to stand again. be upstanding. We may leave now. We have come to the end of, but those who are required to be here, the Jewish community, you may remain behind.
Como?